views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
We've had the first blink in the battle over the nation's finances as Mitch McConnell has agreed to raise the debt limit, but only till December. And we're going to talk about that tonight in excruciating detail. We also will talk about the infrastructure bill, the child tax credit, vaccine mandates in schools. We'll talk about criminal justice in the borough of the Bronx, and a whole lot more with a freshman congressman from the 15th Congressional District. It is Representative Jamaal Bowman. Nice to see you again, sir. How are you? Everything all right there in Washington?
Everything's okay. Hanging in there. How are you, Gary? Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Never a dull moment. I'm sure. I do appreciate your taking the time out of your incredibly busy schedule. I should mention that this is being recorded Thursday and it will not air till Monday. So there may be, certainly when we're talking about the debt limit and other issues, there may be some changes between now and then. But we're going to get to the bottom as best we can right now. So let's talk about, let's start with the debt limit, raising the debt limit. Mitch McConnell had said, okay, I guess we will raise the debt limit to get you through December. But he then went very conveniently. He said the Democrats seem intent on saving themselves and they can't run their own party. So let's start with the raising of the debt limit, and then you can address some of his comments as you choose.
Well, happy that the Senate has voted to raise the debt limit. We will vote to do the same thing on the House side. And, you know, many have argued that the debt limit should be eliminated, that it's an obsolete aspect of our governance. The United States can never and must never default. We must not jeopardize our credit rating because if we were to do that, if that were to happen, everything that we claim is valuable today will cease being valuable tomorrow, and it will put us in a very vulnerable and precarious situation. So happy that the Senate got it done. The House is going to get it done, but I think we need to push the envelope and discuss the elimination of the debt limit or something like that as we continue to evolve as a country. So, and, you know, Mitch McConnell and the Republicans, in terms of their comments, you know, they're consistent in their messaging. I'll give them that, you know, consistently.
That's an interesting comment because it is effective for their constituents and other people.
Yeah.
Their party. I want to just explore what you said. It's very interesting. And I guess the question is, can you have that dialogue about eliminating the debt limit now when you've got to solve a problem? Or is now the time to have that? Because if you do that, maybe you can see a larger picture. Or is it better to, at this point, let's just get it done. Let's look past December and then deal with the financial infrastructure of the country?
Well, I think it's always a good time to have intelligent dialogue and smart conversations about what's happening in our country, where we are and where we're trying to go, whether it's the elimination of the debt limit or expanding the Supreme Court. I mean, you know, we're still operating from, you know, a constitution which is sacred, but which was implemented 245 years ago, and there's been amendments to it. And we need to discuss, what changes we need to make in our country going forward, whether it's reversing Citizens United, eliminating the debt limit, or expanding the court. I think we should always be having intelligent conversations about our country and where we are and where we need to go, without being, and this is what I was going to say about McConnell and the Republicans, without being antagonistic, without bringing vitriol or hate into the conversation. It's just dialogue. Dialogue is healthy for a democracy.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because I do want to get to the infrastructure bill and what that could mean for the borough of the Bronx. But how would eliminating, if you could do it in a brief statement, how would eliminating the debt limit work, and how would it change the economy for the better, as you believe it will?
Well, some have argued that the president could simply mint $1 trillion coin that we borrow against, going forward for our economy. That's one way it could work. There are other ideas out there as well. But I think that brings up a larger conversation about how do we judge the health and well-being of our economy? Is GDP alone the proper measure, or should there be other measures? When you look at how wealth inequality, how large it is in our country, and how some at the top benefit disproportionately from it, there's a lot of conversations to have about our economy. And, minting of a coin is one aspect of the debt limit conversation, but there are many others. So,
well, this is a perfect segue to talk about the infrastructure bill. Can we write checks for anything we want? I mean, that's really the question in this case. You're talking about climate change, child tax credit, helping families. I mean, a whole list of considerations potentially in the 3.5 trillion being asked for. And of course, the kickback is you can't just keep printing money. So can we keep printing money and say, well, 3.5 trillion, why not 4 trillion? Because you can probably find uses for that money as well.
So yes, we can. The federal government can authorize spending, what some call deficit spending, as it needs to. We did it in response to COVID. Last year we injected upwards of $5 trillion into the economy to respond to COVID and keep our economy going. We did it many years ago when we decided to put a man on the moon. We invested a lot of money in NASA to make sure we got that done. We did it when we created a public school system, when we implemented Title I programs. The conversation, in my opinion, is less about the quote unquote costs when we talk about the federal government, and more about what are the needs of our economy. And in my opinion, those needs are housing as a human right, healthcare as a human right, exemplary education for everyone, childcare that is universal, and workforce development that unlocks the potential earning power of each individual. And then on the other side of that, we have to stop allowing the wealthy to hide trillions of dollars in tax havens overseas. I don't know if you saw the recent article, literally $17 trillion are hidden in tax havens right now. We have to make sure corporations and international corporations contribute to our democracy, and the wealthy contribute their fair share. Those things aren't happening. So while, we can have a debate about is the government spending more, we also have to have a debate about is the wealthy contributing their fair share to our economy? And that answer is no. Now, states and counties and cities, it's more of a balanced checkbook situation, right? It's just like a kitchen table, balancing your checkbook, making sure you're okay. The federal government historically has authorized spending. Our push is now make sure we spend on care workers, our seniors, the poor, people of color, and most of all, women, to get them back to work after COVID.
Is there a pushback or a legitimate concern, which is what you hear, doing what you're suggesting will raise inflation and will ultimately, we don't have that money. And you talk about comparing it to a personal bank account. I don't borrow what I can't, what I don't have readily available. I don't know that I can pay back. So the pushback to that is you just can't keep printing money.
Mm-hmm. So we deal with inflation by ensuring the wealthy pay their fair share. The wealthy is not contributing their fair share to our tax system. Neither are corporations, neither are internationals. That's how you deal with the issue of inflation. They have trillions of dollars sitting in tax havens around the world that should be a part of the American economy, and it's not. So that's one way to deal with inflation. And as I mentioned before, the American government has a history of investing in our economy or deficit spending. Trump just did it, I believe in 2000, I forget the year. When was he? 2017, when he gave trillions of dollars in tax cuts to the wealthy. Trump just did it. And there was no conversation about, well, we can't afford to do that. We also did it with the New Deal. I mean, the New Deal in response to the Great Depression, in response to World War II, we implemented the New Deal. We built the middle class, and that became a time where the middle class was thriving as much as ever in American history. Now, Blacks and Latinos were kept out of that because of redlining, but this time we're trying to do it right to make sure everyone is included.
The president conceded that his $3.5 trillion price tag will need to shrink substantially. The issue, and the president has, the way it's been reported, he's tacked to the left so far, that he still would like to see a lot get done. How far are you willing to go? I mean, the numbers now that we're looking at, Joe Manchin, I think at one point said $1.5 trillion. Now I'm hearing 2.2 or $2.5 trillion. How far are you willing to go to compromise so that something gets done?
Well, right now I'm still at 3.5. And, I think we need to look at the programs and the policy before we get to the paycheck and the price. What policies do we need to implement to ensure the health and well-being of the American economy, the health and well-being of our democracy, and competitiveness with China and other countries? I believe, and when you look at dynamic scoring and research, when we invest in universal childcare and early childhood education, for example, every dollar invested, you get $7 on the back end, and you pay less for healthcare and you pay less for carceral systems, because you actually created a nurturing environment for children and families, which is what doesn't exist right now, which is why we have complex traumas and problems on the back end. So for me, I need to know what's in it and what's being threatened in terms of being taken out. I've heard, they want to, Sinema and Manchin, don't want to have, lower drug prices for seniors. I've heard they don't want to raise corporate tax. I've heard they want to get rid of public housing investment. Here's the other thing, Gary, and it's really important for your listeners and those watching this program to understand. We actually have offset. We have pay-fors for the 3.5 trillion. So because we have those pay-fors, the price tag is going to be relatively zero, because I myself I'm going to be introducing two bills that will raise 1.5 trillion over 10 years if they were to pass. And there are many other bills that are paid for. So the thing about Manchin and Sinema specifically and others is they don't want it to be 3.5, but then they don't like the pay fors we're coming with, and then they have no alternative. So it's like, are we here to govern for the American people? Or are we governing for the fossil fuel industry and the pharmaceutical industries that are lobbying very hard to make sure the number is as low as possible on the Build Back Better Act?
So I guess the very obvious question is, it's very easy. I'm not going to necessarily agree or disagree with what you're saying, but the political realities are, if you want to get it passed, would you have to compromise somewhere along the way? And would you be ready to do that if necessary, just to get it done? Because if you don't get it done, the political ramifications of that could be catastrophic for Democrats.
Yeah, we're going to compromise, but I think Manchin should compromise as well in terms of the pay-fors, in terms of the offsets. You don't like the number? We have ways to offset that number. Are you willing to compromise on the offsets? Too often, I think progressives are asked to compromise, and we have many times over. 3.5, just so we're clear, is the compromise. The initial President Biden number was 6 trillion. So we're already at 3.5, 4.7 if you include the 1.2 hard infrastructure part of the bill. So we've already compromised, so let's continue the negotiations and see where we land.
Do you see changing tactics at some point and just saying, you know what, let's go for reconciliation, make the filibuster, changed and make it permanent? Do you see politically that a direction to go? Or is it really, you know what, we don't want to go there because you're going to open it up and then one day Republicans will have the the majority somewhere and all of a sudden you're going to find that you did something that hurts your own initiatives?
Yeah. Just to be clear, the Build Back Better Act is going through a reconciliation process now. That's why it's taking a bit longer, because it has to go through the bird bath to see if it's eligible to get past the parliamentarian. So that's happening. The bipartisan infrastructure framework, the BIF, is ready to be voted on. It has bipartisan support. That will pass. So we're focused on the human infrastructure part, if you will. But to your point about the filibuster, I believe it's a Jim Crow relic. I believe it should be abolished. It was put in place purposely to stop civil rights legislation from moving forward, and even anti-lynching legislation from moving forward. Now, some say, well, don't abolish it outright, go around it for voting rights, for example, which I support because we absolutely have to pass voting rights. Go around it for, H.R. 4, the John Lewis bill, which I also support. But again, we need to have a real conversation about, do we need this thing, or is a majority a real majority, even though it's a slim majority? And you're right, you take the risk of, the other party when they're in office, what are they going to do? Especially now that they have aligned themselves with Trump and alternative facts. So that is scary to think about.
Let's bring this home a little bit and talk about the effect on the district. What does passing this legislation, what does this infrastructure bill mean for the borough of the Bronx? What could it mean?
It's going to be transformative. So, I represent some of Westchester too, so I want to mention that as well. But we're talking about changing convectors in Co-op City. We're talking about water treatment plant upgrades in Yonkers, fixing the sewage system in Mount Vernon, investing in public housing like Edenwald and Boston Seacourt to make sure it is livable and dignified living. Talking about workforce development in partnership with local colleges and K-12 education, and all of it, and all of the hard infrastructure focused on climate change so that we end our dependency on fossil fuel and move towards renewable energy. We're also talking about, there's a large number of care workers in our district that work in the care economy and provide home care to seniors. They will earn a living wage. They will earn paid leave. They will be a part of a union and will be able to work with dignity. That is also huge. And finally, looking at not paying more than 7% of your salary towards childcare, 3K programs. Now we can help families to best prepare their children for kindergarten so that they could hit the ground running in our public schools. In addition to making the child tax credit permanent, which will lift 50% of people across the country out of poverty. And I believe that number is about 30,000 in our district that benefits from that. So it would just be the investment that the Bronx has needed for many, many decades. The federal government is finally stepping in and getting that done.
Let's talk in reality, because there are organizations, let's say eliminating the peaker plants in the South Bronx. I realize that's not your district. Richie Torres will have to handle that. But even in Van Cortlandt Park, you've got the Van Cortlandt Stadium that hasn't been touched since I was a kid. They're talking about the daylighting of Tibbetts Brook. There's a lot of infrastructure in parks. How does an organization or a group or somebody get to you or get to others to get on that list, that beautiful list of organizations and infrastructure improvements I'm concerned, of course, about the borough of the Bronx?
That's a great question. And that's why from the very beginning, we've been working with organizations who represent Tibbetts Park and Van Cortlandt and others so that we can have a clear understanding of their needs and we can provide technical support to help them apply for the grants that are available. There's also going to be money coming in to the state, to the county, to the city, that these groups, along with elected members of Congress like myself, can advocate to ensure that a place like Van Cortlandt Park and that stadium that just needs so much work that can be beautiful should be a part of the conversation in terms of beautification, in terms of infrastructure. So we already have those relationships. We began to create those relationships during the appropriation season, but now those relationships are even stronger and they will have my support so that the money is invested in the highest need areas. And then finally, the President's Justice 40 initiative, which focuses on historically neglected communities of color, is going to allow that money to get channeled directly into the areas where it's needed the most.
I wanted to move forward on a couple of other issues that are out there. Schools just opened. I know you can be in Congress, but I know where your heart really is.
Right.
That's the kids and teachers and principals, of course, going back to school. The vaccine mandates are interesting, and they've created a bit of a stir. Are you concerned that the mandates are too strict and that we could lose teachers or principals or the staff members who are valued, and then, of course, create a hole in the hiring and the employment situation in schools?
I am concerned about that, and we're already seeing some of that. My wife is a third grade teacher. She keeps me abreast on what's happening in her school, and she's also a union leader, so I get to hear about what's happening in other schools. Thankfully, there hasn't been a mass exodus from our schools, so that's a good thing. And thankfully, the positive COVID cases are last I checked, are below 1% in our schools. So that's all a good thing. Obviously, the word mandate is scary because we're a free country, and things like mandates are people are taken aback by them. That's why I think it's important for us to really have an education campaign, really have an engagement campaign so that people can feel secure enough with the vaccine to hopefully, trust it and take it. And believe me, as a Black man, I know the history of our relationship specifically with the healthcare system. So I get it. And it was hard for me to get the vaccine when I initially got it. But it's not just about me. It's about my family. It's about my community. And it's about ensuring that we can get back to a place where hopefully we can congregate together and be without masks. But the city's done a really good job with the mask mandates, with the vaccine encouragement. I know some teachers don't like it, but it seems to be keeping them and the kids safe.
Listen, I'm going to openly advocate for taking the vaccine. I understand. I'm not a Black man.
Me too.
I understand what people are concerned about, but we've had vaccines for all kinds of things. I mean, kids are vaccinated against measles. You can't even enroll in public school unless you are vaccinated for that. We may as well be vaccinated for this too. Anyway, I want to also move on to something that you have engaged a pretty significant dialogue. Violence numbers, crime numbers, in some ways are trending downward, but of course, we all hear about a shooting here, a gang incident there, and even one just rips your heart out. What do we do? I mean, your district, you were telling me before the show, your district includes some of the most difficult gun numbers and gang numbers What do we do? How do you approach this, and what can you, as a Congress member, do to help influence the things to move in the right direction?
So there's not one answer, and there's not one agency that's going to solve this problem by itself. These are complex traumas converging in our communities, from mental health to poverty to lack of social, educational, and vocational supports. So it's going to take myself and every elected official who represents these areas to work with law enforcement, to work with education, to work with community-based organizations like SNUG, Stand Up to Violence, BRAG, and others, to put our heads together to figure out how to have a data-driven approach to identify those who are most at risk of committing violent acts, to engage them through mentorship and relationship building, to provide social services to them, whether it's housing, mental health, jobs, or education. And then when it comes time for accountability, that accountability is where it needs to be. But all of that needs to be funded, and it needs to be funded at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. So in terms of this reconciliation package, it's really good to see $2.5 billion invested in violence reduction as part of the Build Back Better Act. That's huge. But there's additional resources that the federal government can invest, whether it's in education or other areas, to ensure that we're meeting the needs of our kids before they get to the point of committing violence. One data point that I want to mention that I've learned since I've been collaborating with law enforcement, many of our young people who end up committing acts of violence are children identified as having special needs in our school system. And our school system needs the resources and the approach to properly meet the needs of children.
I'm going to add the word commitment to make sure that recognize that this is something that needs attention. Congressman, we're almost out of time, so I want to ask you a general final question. Is there any hope for a better dialogue in Washington? I mean, have you thrown your hat in and say, that's it? I mean, we just can't work together. We're dealing with the most fundamental issues, with issues I know you and many of your colleagues care about, and yet you can't have a reasonable dialogue about the issues, but only about the politics and the structure of them. Is there hope, or are you at this point, I'm just going to do my thing? Very
hard between Democrats and Republicans. Much easier Democrat to Democrat. And I think
that split now is a solvable split.
So I think when Democrats deliver on President Biden's agenda, I think we will maintain the majority in the House and Senate. If we do that, the Republicans will see that their shenanigans no longer work, and now they have to get back to principled governing. So I think this is a key. The next year is key. Can we deliver on the agenda? Can we maintain the majority? If we do that, the Republicans are going to see clearly they're going to have to take another approach. And
Congressman, you're going to have to run, but it sounds like you see step one and then step two. Like you see progress, and the first process and the first part of that would be to get along with your colleagues on that.
Past Biden's agenda. That's step one. That's the main thing. Step two is maintain the majority.
Congressman Jamaal Bowman, tremendous to have you. We can't thank you enough for taking the time. Informing your constituents, informing the people of the Bronx that's what I do every day. So we appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Next week, it looks like we're going to try to do a show about neighborhoods, how to build a better Bronx neighborhood. That will be our topic next week. We'll see you then. Good night.